Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m., so let's get started. Hopefully, some more people will roll in as the session goes on. So, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this session on registration and legal identity. I hope you've been enjoying the research forum so far and also had a chance to explore a bit of Bangkok. My name is Chloe Harvey, and I'm an associate statistician with the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics team, which is based in the Statistics Division here at ESCAP. Before joining ESCAP, I worked with UNICEF, supporting their health and HIV program and collaborating with civil society organizations to strengthen responses to broader health issues across the region. So this is an area very close to my heart, and I'm delighted to be moderating this session, which will explore how CRVS ID systems interact with gender and health and showcase some of the important research being conducted in this space. So before we begin, I'd also like to emphasize that this session is intended to be a safe and respectful space. We're all here for constructive discussion, and I encourage everyone to be mindful of the diverse backgrounds, identities, and lived experiences represented in this room and online. So just something to bear in mind as we approach the presentations and dialogue with openness, curiosity, and respect. So shortly, I will introduce our first speaker, and each presenter will speak for 10 minutes. And then if there is time, they will have 5 minutes of question and answers immediately after each speaker. If we don't have time, please do hold your questions until the end, as we will be having a Q&A session during the speaker panel at the end of the session. So please write your questions down for the earlier speakers. We will start with two presentations, which will be delivered virtually via pre-recorded video presentation. But we're also very lucky to have those presenters also joining us online, so they'll be available to answer any questions. So with that, let's begin with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Sebastian Leon Geraldo, who will present a paper which was recently published in the International Journal of Transgender Health, titled When Death Tears You Apart: The Omission of Transgender Identities in Colombian Death Certificates. Sebastian is a researcher working at the intersection of public health, development studies, and gender justice. He is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of the Sustainable Development Goals for Latin America and the Caribbean at Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia, and a research at Liga de Salud Trans. His work focuses on how official data and information systems can better recognize populations that have historically been excluded, with particular attention to civil registration, vital statistics, gender identity, and what he has framed as statistical justice. He has published on health inequalities, conflict-affected populations, and the exclusion of transgender identities from official systems. And his current work explores how more inclusive civil registration and vital statistics and mortality data can support both human rights and better public policy. So we'll move to Sebastian's presentation, which will be delivered virtually.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Sebastián León Giraldo, and I am a researcher at Liga Salud Trans Health League, and in the Center for Sustainable Development Goals for Latin American and the Caribbean here at Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. I want to share a study today that asks a simple but very important question. When a transgender person dies in Colombia, is their identity, the identity they lived, recorded in official death certificate? Our paper is called When Death Tears You Apart: The Omission of Transgender Identities in Colombian Death Certificates. It was published in May 2025 in the International Journal of Transgender Health. And I am honored to present this in the 2026 CRVS Research Forum, a space that brings together exactly the people who build and improve the system that record every human life. Let me start with the problem. In Colombia, like in most countries, Death certificates record the sex assigned at birth, not the gender that a person actually lived in. For most people, this makes no differences, but for transgender people, it means something deeply painful. It means that at the very moment of death, the state removes who they were from the record. They are wiped out of their own history. This creates three serious problems. The first is what scholars call epistemic injustice. The state refuses to accept that trans people know their own identity. The second is a major data gap. We simply don't know have reliable death statistics for transgender populations. We don't know how many die, we don't know from what, we don't know at what age. The third is a human rights violation. The right to be recognized does not end when a person dies. CRVS systems are not neutral. They either confirm life or they delete them. This study used a qualitative approach built on community participation. We conducted 20 in-depth interviews with transgender and non-binary community leaders across 7 regions of Colombia, from Bogotá to the Pacific coast to conflict-affected areas like Caquetá and Norte Santander. Participants were selected through a snowball sampling, starting with leaders affiliated with Liga Salud Trans, our community research partners. They were not just informants, they were co-investigators. 18 participants identified themselves as transgender women and 2 as transgender men. All interviews were recorded and transcribed in Spanish and analyzed using a method called inductive thematic coding using en vivo software. The analysis produced more than 550 codes references organized into 6 themes. This study was approved by an ethics committee, and all participants gave informed consent, and emotional support was available throughout the process. Okay, before going into the key findings, let me give you a map of what we found. The analysis produced 6 themes. The first is about knowledge and personal experiences with death registration. The second, and the one with most coded references, is about the obstacles people face when trying to register a trans person death. The third explores what happens when gender identity is left out of the record. The fourth captures community proposal for change. The fifth looks at what inclusion would mean for trans people. And the sixth reveals the deep gap between urban and rural areas. Together, these 16 produce more than 550 coded references, which tells you just how much these communities had to say about this topic. Now, let me go deeper into the first key finding, obstacles. The most reported obstacle with 38 references was the way public officials treat the bodies of trans people, forensic agents, police, hospital workers. Time and again, participants describe a system that refuses to see the person in front of them. Community leaders told us that when they asked officials to record their person's real identity, they were told the same thing every time. We follow the protocol, we use the name and sex of the identity document, their IDs, which this brings us to the second biggest obstacle, the very real difficulty of changing that document in the first place. Colombia has had laws allowing that since 2015, but in practice, the process is expensive, discriminatory, and only works in big cities. And when someone dies, the people who love them most, their chosen families, have no legal standing. They cannot claim the body, they cannot ensure the person is treated with dignity. In the eyes of the system, they simply do not exist. As one participant described it, they write, men dressed in a skirt. And I say, wow, what is happening here? So, what happens when identity is not recorded? The consequences are serious and concrete. The most reported consequence, 35 references, is the systematic under-recording of trans deaths. When gender identity is not in the record, we cannot count trans people in mortality statistics. We cannot know their life expectancy. We cannot design public health programs for them. They become, in the data, invisible. The second consequence, with 24 references, is the failure of judicial investigation. I want to pause the analysis here for one moment and let the participants speak directly. A trans man leader told us, as long as we continue to be invisible in all these statistics, what are the possibilities of measuring our lives? It is very important. It allows us to see how many of us there are, what our life expectancy is. A trans woman leader said, we are afraid of what will happen to our bodies. This regulation would allow that fear to go away. We could live much more peacefully knowing that if something happened to us, we will not have that fear of not being recognized. And another trans person put this simple. They are stealing our memory and our history. And those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. These are not abstract concerns. This is what living without recognition looks like. What is important to understand is that communities did not just describe the problem, they came with solutions. The most requested change is legal recognition of chosen families. In Colombia, when a trans person dies, the law gives all authority to biological family. But sometimes these biological families are often the ones who reject them in life. Chosen families, the ones who were there every day, have no legal right to claim the body or protect the person's identity. The second proposal is training for public officials, but not just sensibility or sensitivity training, but actual forensic training. How to recognize a person's gender identity after death and how to document it correctly. Participants also highlighted the urban and rural gap. In rural Colombia, national legal advances are essentially invisible at the local level. Local officials don't know the law, or sometimes they refuse to apply it. In some areas, also armed groups control who can be buried under what name. This is a CRVS implementation crisis, not just a legal one. To understand what is really happening here, I want to offer three analytical and theoretical lenses. The first is administrative violence, a concept from Speed. Speed argues that bureaucratic systems look neutral on the surface, but they maintain social inequality. The instruction to use the sex on the identity document sounds like a simple rule, but it is, in effect, a mechanism for systematic discrimination. The second lens is epistemic injustice from Ficker and applied to Colombia by Chamorro Muñoz and other colleagues. They describe this as dying twice, once in life when identity is denied, and once again in official records when the state refuses to remember who you were. The third lens is from Mbembe, who wrote about how the state decides not just who lives and who dies, but also who is remembered. Death certificates are not just administrative forms, they are the state's final word on who a person was. Let me bring everything together. What we found is this. Colombia death registration system systematically removes transgender people from the record. It leaves out their identity, it excludes the chosen families, it misclassifies their deaths, it enables impunity for violence against them, and it produces a data void and makes evidence-based public health policy impossible. The path forward is not technically complicated. What communities are asking for is achievable. Add a gender identity field and a social name field to the death certificate. Give chosen families legal recognition in the registration processes. Train the officials who handle these processes, forensic workers and health staff, and others. Hire transgender people in the institution responsible for these records. And critically, implement these reforms everywhere, not just in Bogota, in every municipality, in every rural registration office. For the CRBS community in this room, this is a test of whether our system truly counts everyone right now in Colombia and across Latin America. they do not. Let me close by returning to the question I started with. When a transgender person dies in Colombia, is their identity reflected in official record? Today, the answer is no. And that no has consequences for data, for policy, for justice, and for the trans people who live knowing that even in death, the state may not remember who they were. But we know now what needs to change. The communities have told us clearly, specifically, and with courage. Our responsibility is to turn those demands into reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for your presentation and for sharing such important insights from your research. I think your research really highlights how civil registration and legal identity systems are not only administrative tools, and I think we sometimes forget that, but also mechanisms for recognition, dignity, and rights. And it's really a strong reminder that meaningful progress comes when evidence and lived experience inform each other. I encourage you all to also read the full paper, which is published in the International Journal of Transgender Health, and it can be accessed via our website. We have a bit of time for questions, and we do have Sebastian online. Thank you for joining us, Sebastian. So we'll have about 5 minutes of Q&A. So we'll open the floor up to those in the room. Also, those online, if you have any questions, please do feel free to put your questions into the chat. Please. If I could ask you to please say your name and your organization and your country as well, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Victor Ousu from Ghana. I work with Ghana Statistical Service. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very insightful. On one of your slides, you made mention of training of public officials on issues regarding this registration of transgender individuals. My question is, what happens when the state does not recognize the existence of transgender, or they don't accept that practice, although they know it's going on, but it's not enshrined in their laws? How do they train this public official to accept? And even if it's the state allow it or it's legal, does religion, let me put it, how does religion and cultural beliefs of these public officials play when it comes to training of these officers? Thank you very much.
I think
Chloe,
we need to
I'm sorry.
unmute. Can you
Should
hear
I?
Sebastian?
Yes. Should I reply to him now, or should I wait
Yes.
until we have a couple of questions more? Or
Yes, please feel free to respond now. Thank you.
okay. Thank you very much for your question. That's definitely one of the most important things at this point in Colombia. We have a very protective laws, and now in Colombia, transgender and non-binary people are recognized due to constitutional court ruling. So that makes us a little bit easier to move into this process in terms of that. Now what we are asking, or what the communities are asking here in Colombia, is like including the other variables that are now in the IDs in official in the official death certificate. So that we know that at least from Colombia, it could be an like a next step, like in terms of what to do in other countries in which this is not legal, or if it is not possible at this moment. I'm not pretty sure how we can handle that. But the thing there is that this is an issue of dignity. This is an issue of counting people. And in terms of public health, if we have better data, we definitely can have better public policies. And in terms of how we can make that in countries in which this is not legal, at this point, I do not have an answer to that. But I think that is something it now stays on my mind to start thinking of that. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Sebastian. And I think some of our next presenters will also be talking about legal reform and legal gender recognition. So there will be more information provided in those presentations as well. Do we have any more questions for Sebastian? Okay, so I think, Sebastian, if you wouldn't mind staying online until the end of the session, thank you very much. And then if you think of any questions for our speakers, we will also have the panel at the end of the session. Thank you very much, Sebastian. So our second speakers are Madeline Cameron Waterworth and Najib Chalele, whose presentation is titled Liberté, Égalité, Interoperabilité, Gender Identity and Civil Registration, Vital Statistics and ID. Madeline serves as the Associate Director of Gender Advocacy at the Global Health Advocacy Incubator in the Data for Health team. Najib Chalele, who is the co-author of this paper, serves as a global legal consultant and in-country coordinator for Colombia for the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. Madeline and Najib are at work on the development of a first-of-its-kind global legal status report on legal recognition as administered by civil registration systems. They're also working on the integration of gender identity into civil registration and vital statistics systems in Colombia in partnership with leading civil society organization Liga de Salud Trans. So Madeline and Najib, over to you for the video presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. It is wonderful to be a part of ESCAP's 2026 CRVS Research Forum. I'm Madeline Cameron Waterworth, the Associate Director for Gender Advocacy at the Global Health Advocacy Incubator, or GHAI. GHAI is an implementing partner of the Bloomberg Data for Health initiative, which works to strengthen birth and death registration systems. GHAI is the initiative's legal unit supporting governments to help strengthen CRVS ID systems through legal review and reform, budget sustainability, and civil society advocacy. I'm joined by my colleague Najib Chalele, our in-country coordinator in Colombia, and our global legal consultant. Our paper is about non-binary and trans people, so we want to clarify from the outset that non-binary is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity falls outside the male-female gender binary, and a trans person describes people with a gender identity that doesn't align with the sex they were assigned at birth. My and Najib's paper uses the French Republic's tripartite motto and borrows it for its title. We apply this liberty, equality, fraternity to legal gender recognition, the process that some trans and non-binary people use to update sex and gender markers on official documentation. That process is key for liberty and equality, but it also needs to be established in interoperable fashion. More on that shortly. Before we begin, we want to emphatically thank the experts who have shared their knowledge with us, who've made this work possible. This includes our path-breaking colleagues and collaborators at Liga de Salud Trans, who we are honoured to work alongside, both in our advocacy portfolio and today as panellists in this session. We also thank our colleagues Emily Bartels-Bland and Robert Eckford for their ongoing thought partnership.
So we are here to talk about legal gender recognition, which to CRVS system stakeholders might be a new terrain. But first, I want to introduce it with an example. In Colombia, during the COVID pandemic, death data was not disaggregated to include trans and non-binary people. So now, even after 6 years after the health emergency, we still don't know how many trans and non-binary individuals died due to the virus. This is why legal gender recognition is important as a pathway to obtain this data, but it is also important in itself as a way to ensure that trans and non-binary people have a life with dignity. And now I'll be quoting Outright International, which says that when trans people cannot present official documents that align with their gender identity and expression, they face scrutiny and risk discrimination or violence whenever they need to provide identification, whether opening a bank account, accessing healthcare or employment opportunities, renting an apartment, or passing through a police checkpoint. However, we acknowledge that not all trans and non-binary individuals wish to access legal gender recognition, and this is important to take into consideration. But for trans and non-binary people, ensuring access to legal recognition can also be critical. Without it, trans persons' identity documents can be gender incongruent, which means that the document might have a mismatch between the gender or sex category as it's recording on the document and the way the person presents themselves. Without the updated identification, trans people can experience service denial, barriers to human rights enjoyment, and even be subjected to violence. As practitioners know, birth registration within civil registration systems is the principal means of establishing legal identity. Already, a range of countries across regions, which include but are not limited to Kenya, South Africa, Bangladesh, India, Turkey, Argentina, Malta, and Colombia, have legal and policy frameworks, instruments, and forms that create the possibility of amending sex marker recording in birth registration to align it with gender or to reflect a marker beyond the male or female binary. This is the means of legal recognition, which refers to this process by which a person can update their name and gender markers on official documents and in registries. Right now, we have put a few definitions on a slide you should be seeing in case anyone needs a reminder, because in the context of this paper and for us, gender and sex are different concepts with distinct definitions, but we understand that in the context of CRVS, they're usually used interchangeably, so it might be important for you to keep this in mind. Okay, so the thing with legal gender recognition is that it is a challenge for the systems. So for this audience, what is noteworthy is that civil registration systems are often tasked with administering legal gender recognition. And as countries enable people to update their registered sex or gender, or introduce a new marker that goes beyond these categories, such as T for travesti or transgender, and B for non-binary, or even the X marker as an umbrella marker, there is an urgent need to think through how that information is integrated across different government systems, such as vital statistics or the identity management. This is the health equity dimension to this. If and when gender identity data is properly integrated into vital statistics, including through death registration, we could begin to understand disparities in mortality among gender diverse populations. Right now, transgender and gender diverse people suffer somewhat from statistical invisibility, meaning that they are not reflected in the statistics. And this just brings us back to the first example that I used at the beginning of this session, which is the example of Colombia with the COVID pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, in which 6 years after the pandemic emergency passed, we don't have official data on how many trans and non-binary people died from the virus. And this is the interoperability side of things, the interconnectedness that legal gender recognition requires.
This paper presents preliminary findings from a larger piece of work that Najib and I are collaborating on, GHAI's forthcoming first of its kind global legal status report on legal recognition as administered by civil registration systems. We used ILGA's Global Mapping, a comprehensive resource on legal recognition frameworks, as a baseline to identify relevant countries, as set out on this slide. From there, we selected a subset of 20 countries based on 3 sometimes overlapping criteria: leading practice status, low or middle income country classification, and or the introduction of a new sex or gender marker category. These include transgender in India or intersex in Kenya. I note that the term intersex refers to people born with physical sex characteristics that do not fit typical definitions for male or female bodies. The methodology combines a desk review of country-level legal and policy frameworks and regional and international instruments with a review of academic and other commentary. Expert validations were then held and continue to be held with government, civil society, legal and academic stakeholders. Because those interviews are in progress, this report shares preliminary findings, a snapshot if you will. And in terms of what those findings were, the first is that legal recognition is not a global north phenomenon, and there is especially strong practice from the Americas. Consider that in 2012, Argentina passed its gender identity law, which at the time was considered the most accessible pathway for legal gender recognition in the world. By 2024, Outright International had issued a report on countries with the strongest practices globally, with 35% of those countries being countries of the Americas. Second, this is a rapidly evolving area with movement in legislative, executive, and judicial forums. And I have some examples here. You are all, or many of you are seated in Thailand, a country which has been considering draft bills aimed at legal recognition. In Austria, subsequent to our validation with an in-country expert, we read or saw coverage of a constitutional court ruling on non-binary people's right to an appropriate designation of their gender in the civil registry. In Colombia, we collaborate with Liga with a view to seeing the Ministry of Justice and subsequently the Office of the Presidency reissue a decree that expands legal recognition. So the takeaway for CR practitioners is pretty straightforward, and that is that this is a space worth watching closely. The framework in place in your jurisdiction today might be strengthened or weakened tomorrow. And if there isn't a framework in place, a policy might be coming down one of these pipelines.
Some of the discussion points that we found was first the interoperability challenge, in which even countries with the world's strongest recognition frameworks, we have observed that interoperability remains an issue. It unfolds more or less along these lines. A person successfully updates their birth registration and then finds that other government records, such as health databases, have not been updated. As a result, when this person tries to go to the hospital to access a health service, it can be denied based on the incongruence between the official document and the health databases. So people who access legal gender recognition can struggle to access essential public services. I already mentioned healthcare, but this is also applicable to education, health, housing, and other services. And the other discussion point that we want to bring is the vital statistics scope to legal gender recognition, in which when 6 systems are interconnected, this also raises the possibility of generating vital statistics that can be disaggregated by gender identity. And here we want to highlight the Uruguay's laws, which the Comprehensive Trans Law, Ley Número 19,684, is one of the laws that we identified that includes a very specific article that makes it mandatory to include gender identity in all statistics the National Statistics Agency produces, such as censuses, continuous household surveys, and all public measurements that collect the variable sex.
Legal gender recognition gives rise to a range of intersectional considerations. When we say intersectionality, we mean, as Kimberly Crenshaw's African American Policy Forum has articulated, and I quote, the simple reality that disadvantage or exclusion can be based on the interaction of multiple factors rather than just one. To give you some examples, a 2020 report from the Organization of American States considered intersectional practice in the context of legal recognition. And they considered policies aimed at serving transgender people who are incarcerated, living in poverty, nationals living abroad, and foreign residents, amongst others. Non-citizens with a connection to the country are a key example here. If you think about residents, asylum seekers, refugees, stateless persons, and migrants, they may not be able to access legal recognition processes without specific inclusive design. Malta has addressed this in its legislative framework, but I want to stress our broader point here is that immigration status implications are but one example of an intersectional dimension that requires consideration when designing a legal gender recognition framework. And in all cases, this should be progressed with community stakeholders. Consultation is key for legal recognition, including because gender is deeply related to one's own sense of identity. There are a range of gender identities across the world, with Bangladesh recognising the Hijra identity, with Colombia recognising the travesti identity. Amongst other matters, consultation should illuminate which marker categories communities seek to have recognised. And they should also ensure communities co-design relevant policies. Iceland is illustrative here. Iceland has an unusually accessible and clearly drafted act on gender autonomy. During our validation interview with Al Fisher, who is known for their role in crafting the Act, I commented on this, and Al replied, "It was really testament to how important it is to have community members driving, because we are the ones with the expertise on these issues, so we know how to frame things the right way."
Some considerations for countries who are either developing or strengthening legal recognition framework are first, interoperability and implementation planning, which means that there should be a coordination between different government agencies, including but not limited to health and statistics. Remember, also include education and other sectors before the framework is finalized to guarantee interoperability. And the second is the importance of community co-design and intersectionality, which we have already talked before. It's important to ensure the active participation of communities with lived experiences from the start of the strengthening or the developing of the framework. It's especially important to include people who are like multiply marginalized so as not to exclude different intersectionalities.
Our full report will be available in Q4 of this year, and we would love for all of you who are interested to join us for the release. We really thank you for your engagement with our work. We see CRVS Systems as having a historic opportunity to advance recognition at a time where doing so is particularly symbolic and significant. And we have set our contact details out on this slide for anyone who shares that conviction. In that vein, and finally, we want to very strongly thank the organisers for welcoming this paper and its ideas into the forum fold. We will hand back to Dr. Harvey now and look forward very much to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madeline and Najib, for that fascinating presentation and for sharing those early research findings. I think that your research is an important reminder that often when we talk about interoperability, we're so concerned with, what that means from a technological or operational perspective, but really for the design of fully inclusive civil registration and vital statistics and ID systems, community involvement is essential in designing frameworks that do truly work for everyone. So we're lucky to have Madeline and Najib online. So the floor is open for questions. We have about 5 minutes. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please do raise your hand or put your question into the chat. Please.
Thank you. Victor, once again, it seems I'm interested in these particular topics very well. My question is about the documentation of from official institutions. I want to find out whether you can confirm documents from government services, let's say health, education, access to national ID, if this category, when it comes to sex, is being disaggregated in these forms of sexual orientation for individuals to choose, whilst this issue on transgender in Colombia, as the earlier presenter made mention of, legally accepted. Can you confirm it's on this document? And in what strategies are you pushing or putting in place to ensure that if the disaggregation does not exist, you can do it through coalition and through the advocacy platforms that you have? Thank you.
Madeline,
Najib,
please.
Thanks, Dr. Harvey. Najib, did you want to speak to that from a Colombian point of view? I'm wondering if that's sorry, go ahead.
So I'm not sure I really understood well the question. So is the question is if there is any document where the disaggregation is being like implemented, at least in Colombia, that is a process that we're working with right now. So there's no official document saying that you should disaggregate statistics for gender identity being different from sexual orientation, because as we have found, there's no we didn't really concentrate on sexual orientation because that would have different implications for for the study, but for gender identity, there is a push from the National Statistics Office, which is DANE, to do a different to reform the way in which national statistics are being taken to include a disaggregation for gender identity, a little bit like Uruguay law already does, as we explained in our panel. But this is still something that's in process. There was a push to have this reform made. It went to public consultation. Public consultation has been completed, and we are currently waiting for the National Statistics Office to release the new guidelines on how to collect this data. So currently, you would be able to, like, there's only the draft guidelines, not a policy per se that's being implemented. As far as I know, and please, Madeline, jump in if you want to do so right now. Only Uruguay has this as like part of their law to include vital statistics as an important leg of their policy. But we haven't even found whether this has been really implemented or not. This is part of what we are still validating.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Najib.
With
Oh, sorry, go
permission
ahead.
with permission from the moderator, what I mean, yes, the National Statistical Office can do that through the surveys and censuses, but largely on administrative data, we have education, we have health, we have the civil registration, birth and death, and national ID. I want to find out, whilst we are pushing from the National Statistical Office side, what about Ministry of Education, enrollment? How do they capture the students' identity? Health, if I'm getting health services, how do they capture my vitals? And if we are going to do that, it should not focus on National Statistical Office, but we should look at all agencies that deal with the national data ecosystem. Thank you, Eniva.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the clarification. I think that's exactly what the paper we wrote addresses, and that's exactly the problem that we found. And as of yet, we still don't have like one single answer. What we've seen, at least in the validations I was part of, in the Americas, is that this is an issue. Like, say, for example, you have Argentina and Uruguay, which have this uh, big, important, and like very protective laws for gender identity. And when we did the validations, the people said, like, we passed the laws, they started functioning, and then the interoperability was the challenge. So I can honestly, to be very honest, like I don't know if there is right now one policy that would be like the example for this. And you are right to point that that is a challenge, and that is exactly what we are pointing out. And I don't know if Madeline, you would like to say something, to comment something on this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Najib. I would say two things. The first is just that we observe when looking at legal gender recognition that in a number of settings there's a lot of work and movement on this, and then the flow-on effects or the downstream consequences for statistics generation are not as fulsomely explored. So that is an area of that's a newer area than legal gender recognition, at least as we observe it at this stage in the validation process. So I say that to say it's very new. In terms of what countries are doing, Najib has very helpfully referenced the guidelines that are being developed by DANE. You asked about strategy and advocacy approaches. We always encourage, and this was in our slides, extensive and close collaboration and consultation with communities with lived experience and subject matter expertise. In the context of Colombia, we're privileged to have Sebas with us today, Sebas from Liga de Salud Trans, who worked with DANE or they consulted on the development of those guidelines. So we see them as very strong. In terms of how the guidelines interact more broadly with other areas of statistics generation beyond civil registration systems, I would just comment that our remit as Data for Health initiative, as a partner in that setting, I should say, is really the vital statistics component. So we're very interested in how that interlinks with the generation of other statistics, but that has to this point not been a huge focus of the research today. And we're also happy to send you those guidelines, the draft guidelines, and also the comment we submitted as part of the public consultation process in case that's of interest to you.
Thank you very much, Madeline and Najib. And if you can, please do stay on until the end of the session in case there are any more questions. And yeah, I think this is it's a really complex and evolving issue, and there's not yet one single harmonized international approach. I think many countries are examining how their civil registration and vital statistics systems can address these questions in ways that remain statistically robust while also respecting individuals' identities. So I think there is this challenge in trying to achieve this balance between maintaining international comparable official or vital statistics, but also ensuring that legal gender recognition frameworks exist and it allows individuals to update the gender marker on their legal identity documents. So it's really finding that kind of balance between the administrative function of civil registration systems and the statistical function of vital statistics. And there's no one easy answer yet. But yeah, let's see. We hope it's an evolving area, and we'll be learning more from countries as time goes on. Thank you for your question. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Claire Conry Murray, and Claire will be presenting on systemic barriers to legal gender recognition in Bulgaria, Ecuador, and Peru. Claire is the Associate Director of the Gender Equity Unit at Johns Hopkins University. She is a former professor of psychology and an expert in culture and reasoning about gender equity, as well as research ethics and research methodology. She was the president of the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science from 2023 to 2024. This society is a leader in open science and the movement to increase transparency in behavioral research in order to make it more valid and robust. Claire works to make science more inclusive, and she attended the University of California, Berkeley, where she received a PhD in human development and education. Claire, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here to present on research that the whole Gender Equity Unit worked on. And this research is on the topic of systematic barriers to legal gender recognition in 3 countries, Bulgaria, Ecuador, and Peru. I want to acknowledge the financial support from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I also want to acknowledge the guidance from Vital Strategies, who helped us with the conceptualization, identifying partners, and study design, and a lot of other things. So I want to acknowledge their help. And I especially want to acknowledge our partners in the countries, Bilitis in Bulgaria, Silueta in Ecuador, and UNECIS in Peru. So as you've heard, legal gender recognition is the idea that people's gender identity should be represented on their IDs as they self-identify. This is something that's been recognized as a human right by the UN and is protected under international law. But in many cases, it's not available to gender diverse and transgender people. And when there's an incongruence between identification, they're on legal documents, and their self-identification, it can cause all sorts of issues. So when people hold incongruent documents, it can exacerbate harassment and discrimination, and it can create barriers to health access and to access to other services. But when there is legal gender recognition, it can advance well-being, it can promote mental health, and improve access to different resources. So our research focuses on legal gender recognition across 3 contexts, and each of these contexts has different legal contexts. So in Bulgaria, there's no legal framework for legal gender recognition. So that means there's limited potential for changing documents. And in fact, in 2023, things moved backwards a little bit because sex was the only recognition that was available, and there was not, it is no longer an option to include gender identity as part of legal documents. In Ecuador, it's the further end of the spectrum. Citizens can legally change their name, their sex, or their gender, and it's an administrative process, but it's based on self-identification or self-determination. Peru is sort of in the middle there. It's possible to change your name or your gender, but it requires a judicial approval. There was a proposal in 2016, there's a bill introduced that would allow for people to self-identify without requiring a judicial process, but that has stalled in their Congress. So we have representation from the three countries, and they're quite different in terms of their legal frameworks. Our study aims was to describe how people with diverse gender identities and transgender people navigate and perceive the CRVS systems, the health system, and their access to other services. We want to understand the implications of gender incongruence, and we want to explore what kinds of experiences transgender and gender diverse people have with the healthcare system. And then we want to identify strategies and recommendations. The study included in-depth interviews with transgender and gender diverse people across the three countries, and focus groups in two of them with transgender and gender diverse people. Then we also identified key informants, and we had a focus group in Bulgaria, and then we had key informant interviews in Ecuador and Peru. We did qualitative coding using thematic analysis. We did that at both the in-country level and then at the cross-country level. And we established reliability through either consensus coding or intercoder reliability. So we can look at the results. In terms of the negative experiences that the gender diverse and transgender people reported, they reported negative experiences with employment, healthcare, education, and everyday activities when they had gender incongruent documents. And here's some reporting from our participants. A transgender woman in Peru described this. She says, I always told them there in the healthcare office, please, can you call me by my last name? I always tell them, but they never do. And when I turn around, the people who are present there look at me as if it wasn't, well, me. And they say, is it a woman or is it a man? So I have to bow my head, and sometimes I also raise it better without fear of anything, because I identify myself with what I am without fear. In Bulgaria, a transgender woman talked about being afraid to show her ID and being worried that people will start screaming about me about how that's not my ID. We recognized that there are barriers and facilitators in this process. The barriers that we identified had to do with difficulties with the process, the lack of gender diverse options on legal documents, and the lack of interoperability, as you've heard from other speakers. And then the facilitators were community and personal support. So some of the things that people discussed were especially the difficulties with the process, that it was quite lengthy. It could often be confusing. There were often costs involved, and sometimes the requirements were very difficult to meet. For someone in Peru, they had started the process in 2022, and as of our interviews completed in 2025, they still hadn't been able to change their name. So it's taking quite a long time. Many people discussed the lack of appropriate options when they had to identify their gender identity. It wasn't always a way for people to mark, for example, someone being non-binary. There was, in Bulgaria, there's only the option to be male or female. And then there's also a lack of interoperability. So even in Ecuador, someone who had already been able to change their name in one system was still finding that their name had not been changed across the different systems. So this person describes saying, it has been almost 2 years for me and it continues to appear even in public banks. So it's taking a long time. In terms of facilitators, people most often across all the countries referenced LGBTQ plus groups and individuals who knew about the process. So having a friend who'd already done it, this transgender woman describes, hearing from that friend and also learning about the process on TikTok. In terms of the impact of changing documents, participants in Ecuador, where they were more likely to have been able to have legal gender recognition, they described feeling an increase in psychological well-being, an improvement in daily public interactions, and a feeling of greater security related to administrative procedures and interactions with the police. So this transgender man describes having fewer issues in terms of access to healthcare and a public framework. He says they treated me like a man without any problem, without making a mistake, with my name, without any problem. On the subject of work, also the same on the educational side as well. That is, there were no problems. So being able to have accurate documents has a big impact in a lot of ways. In terms of recommendations for improvement, making the process less lengthy and less confusing, reducing or eliminating costs, and then eliminating hard to meet requirements like going through the whole judicial process as part of the requirements. That was one recommendation. Adding more gender diverse options, so being able to identify yourself as non-binary, and other categories is helpful. One participant, some participants, not just one, also mentioned the need to have as an option that maybe your national ID doesn't need to even mention your gender identity. So, for some people, putting your gender identity as non-binary on your ID can actually introduce opportunities for harassment and discrimination. And so that's something I think that should be considered too. And then lots of participants talked about the need for systems to be more interoperable. So to wrap up, gender diverse people around the globe reported similar negative experiences with healthcare settings, with education and everyday activities due to ID incongruence. Achieving legal gender recognition, participants reported it could reduce experiences of harassment, discrimination by removing the potential for confusion experienced by others during public interactions. And they also reported that reducing these negative interactions seems to reduce stress, which can lead to positive mental health outcomes. So I want to thank you from our long list of authors here for your attention, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Claire, for the very interesting presentation. And I think what really stood out from your research is that even when there are those legal pathways for gender recognition that exist in countries, there's still those administrative barriers that people still need to tackle in order to navigate these systems and achieve legal gender recognition. I think we have time for one question before we move on to the next presenter. Please. Sorry, if you please could use a microphone at the back of the room, or thank you.
Yeah. My question is that in these countries where, let's say, there are considerations of adding more sex/gender markers in ID documents, I'm sure these proposals have already been made and the activists in the countries may be exploring this. I was wondering if you, in your study, you found that there was a particular reasons why the governments were not adding these options. Were they political, administrative? If at all your study covered this?
Yeah. It's different in each of the countries, but I would say, for example, in Bulgaria, that it's definitely political. It has to do with their leadership there. I don't know the context as well in other countries, but there's definitely political issues going on and all around the world. So that's definitely one of the barriers.
Thank you. Okay, we can take one more from the back there.
Good
and then
morning,
we'll
everyone. Hi, Claire. I'm Vijay from Malaysia. You talked about all the negative experiences in your study. Were there any kind of recording of positive experiences or recording gender inequality in your study? Positive experiences from people who were, the people who were different from the normal?
Positive experiences with the
In
system?
terms of when you collected this information,
Yeah.
were they experiencing better healthcare, things like that in healthcare settings?
Yes, when people were able to go through the system and change their documents to match their gender identity, then they did experience a greater reduction in issues, like quite a bit, so that they were having better mental health, they were feeling more well-being and things like that. So being able to have the congruent documents had lots of positive impact. Yeah.
Thank you. If we have any more questions, please save them for the end. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this session. Thank you again, Claire. Our next speaker is Sajana Adhikari, who will present on understanding the issues and challenges in accessing civil registration services among people living with HIV in Nepal. Sajana Adhikari is a national program coordinator at the National Federation of Women Living with HIV and AIDS in Nepal. She leads national HIV and tuberculosis programs focusing on improving access to services for people living with HIV. With a master's degree in rural development, she has a strong background in research and advocacy, working to address barriers, reduce stigma, and promote the rights of people living with HIV in Nepal. Over to you, Sajana.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I think Kohli has already introduced me a lot, so I'll straight go with my presentation. I mean, my on the topic. So, in this research, I'm focusing on the lived experience of people living with HIV, who have been facing the challenge and barriers in accessing civil registration system in Nepal. So before starting, I'd like to thank people living with HIV from Nepal. Uh, I think it's for them, because of them and for them, this studies is being conducted. Also, my organization, National Federation of Women Living with HIV, and National Center for AIDS and STD Control, ART counselor of 3 provinces where I have conducted this study, and also the government official who have been so kind to me during the KII process. Also, uh, UNISCAP team and my supervisor Lizel, who have been so kind and supported to me throughout this process. Also, I have forgot to mention ECA team here, so I also would like to thank ECA and my friends from ECA who have been supported to me during the whole cohort 2 year. Before moving to um, as already 2 previous presentations from Nepal has already focused on CRVS practices and the legal framework. So today on my presentation, I am focusing on the specifically issues of people living with HIV who have been facing the problem on CRVS. And I think Nepal has one of the most progressive policies and from framework, but yet people living with HIV in Nepal has in the national data system and the CRVS system, still the people living with HIV is invisible. That is why this study is being conducted, and also I I'm trying to address the gap with this study by exploring why people living with HIVs are facing the problems. Oh, yeah. So moving on with the methodology. So my research question was, what barriers do people living with HIV face in accessing, registering vital events in Nepal? So for this, to answer this question, I have used the qualitative method, and I have conducted FGD with the people living with HIV from three major HIV high burden provinces of Nepal, and also conducted the KI with 7 participants from the same three provinces. So, as this is to let you all know, the study and the data analysis is still ongoing. So, these findings are, I think you all can find this. Findings should be considered as preliminary because the analysis part is still going on. So, during the study, we have found that the major problems, it's not only for people living with HIV, or it's a general problem of Nepal as well, because we shared a border with India. So cross border in marriage in India, due to the cross border marriage in Nepal and India has been one of the major challenges of uh, people who are not getting CRVS registration in each, I mean, in one country. So also during the study, we have found that the legal system, not the legal system, but the registration system is kind of a discriminatory to goals, particularly during the study in one provinces while we're conducting FGD, and during the FGD, one of the participants said most of the registration officer directly refused the registration of woman, I mean girls, because by saying that one day they will get married and then you can have a citizenship from your own husband, then why to register here? So I think this also one of the major problem. And besides that, awareness and knowledge gaps among people as well has been one of the most major problems. Also the child marriage and the administrative practices also uh, is also the one of the problems. So besides the problems, which is also relates to PLHIV. The people living with HIV who have been facing the specific problems are stigma and discrimination from the government authorities and also from the society. Uh, they also, they also discriminated from the civil registration officers as well. Also, they perceive stigma and fear of disclosure. They have a stigma, uh, they perceive stigma and discrimination by themselves, because what if I need to disclose my identity while registering my vital events? Also, many of the people living with HIV in Nepal are they have a lack of legal identity documentations. Also, cross border marriage influenced by because of the stigma. People living with HIV find HIV positive, like they wants to marry with the HIV positive partner. So that is one of the major problems as well. Also, the early marriage among children affected by AIDS is also one of the major barriers that people living with HIV has been facing. As the study is still ongoing, so these are the few findings that I took from the study. So, despite having a legal framework in Nepal, people living with HIV are still facing the problems to register their vital events, their civil registrations. Also fear of disclosure among people living with HIV is one of the major problem. And also the lack of legal identity of parents and their family members has been one of the major problems. So my recommendation is during the study we have found the administrative practices are different than one to each province. So that is why, so one of my recommendation is harmonize the civil registration practices. Also, we don't have a PLHIV specific data. So I would like to recommend strengthening the linkages between civil registration and health data system so that we can have a data of how many people living with HIV has a legal identity. Also, stigma and discrimination is still exists in the society and the community. So we need to avoid the community as well. Also, many people living with HIVs are still unaware about the legal framework that the national legal frameworks doesn't discriminate them. Also, the advocacy for the rights of PLHIV. Uh, Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sajana, for that excellent presentation. I think your research, I know it's in the early stages, but it's going to provide a very important reminder that access to civil registration is closely linked to broader issues of stigma, discrimination, and social inclusion. And I think similar to the earlier presenters in today's session, you know, even when those legal frameworks exist, fear of disclosure, lack of documentation, and administrative barriers can still prevent people living with HIV from accessing registration and then, of course, accessing their rights and services that come with it. And health services can serve as the kind of trusted entry point for which people living with HIV and other populations who face barriers in accessing those government services, such as civil registration, can do so. So we have time for one or two questions, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Ms. Sajana. I'm Dipesh Rester from Nepal. Definitely this research is going to be an amazing, and the findings would really help the Nepalese human rights activists and lawyers to work further on this issue. I just want to focus on one thing. I'm pretty sure that you are much aware about the HIV bill that the government of Nepal introduced some few years ago. But still, the bill is not implemented as an act. So my question is, do you really think that the CRVS systems and the components of CRVS systems should be included in that bill, and should we advocate again, we can policy advocate on that implementation of that bill, or just we can include the PLHIV's issues in the ongoing National ID and Civil Registration Act? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, and also thank you for reminding that our organization is also working on the HIV bill, so that people living with HIV can have their own bill, and all the social security allowances and all the social services that they can have. We have included all those legal framework and all in the HIV bill. So we will be considering this fact. I think we should consider CRVS system in the bill as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Any other questions for Sajana? Okay. None? In case you think of any, we will have the session at the end. So thank you very much, Sajana. We'll move on to our next speaker, who will be discussing mobile birth registration as an approach to reaching populations in hard-to-reach areas, as well as those who may face barriers in accessing civil registration services. So our next speaker is Dr. Alexander Michael Palmer, who also goes by the name Mike, who will present on documenting the undocumented in the Philippines and Papua New Guinea, mobile birth registration as a pathway to legal identity. Mike is the in-country coordinator for the Data for Health program in the Philippines, and Mike has devoted more than 10 years to development work, having been engaged in projects for the United Nations, the World Bank, JICA, and the European Union. He has also been actively promoting the cause of health and nutrition of children, trade and development, housing for informal settlers, education and environment. He has authored pioneering research commissioned under the program of the Review of the President's Budget, which involved the analysis of the utilization of the health budget. Mike earned his doctoral degree at the University of the Philippines and a master's degree in policy analysis at the Graduate School of Policy Science in Japan. He is currently affiliated with the faculty of the Asian Center at the University of the Philippines and is a fellow of Salzburg Global, a major international health convention, highlighting the extent of his contributions to the health development and policy realm. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Chloe. Good morning, everyone. And good afternoon, good evening to the online participants. I'm pleased and honored to discuss with you this paper, which I co-authored actually with Dr. Emeline Kalimotu, a colleague from the Global Health Advocacy Incubator, who is a lawyer herself. And GHAI, as we call it, as you know, is a partner organization under the Data for Health Initiative. GHAI's primary task is to advocate to governments the importance of CRVS systems. And this work, documenting the undocumented, is showcasing two country cases, the Philippines and Papua New Guinea, particularly focusing on contrasting perspectives on the mobile birth registration as a pathway to legal identity. So just to proceed, I'd like to recognize the contributions to this work by the following: the team from the Global Health Advocacy Incubator, um, also from our lead government partner, the Philippine Statistics Authority. PSA is our lead government counterpart on CRVS system, and also our civil society organization who collaborates with us to advocate for this pending bill, both in houses of Congress in the Philippines. They are very much active in campaigning for to replace a nearly century-old CRVS law in the Philippines. And lastly, to the government of Papua New Guinea for its essential inputs to this work. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, the focus of this paper is mobile birth registration as a pathway to legal identity. So civil registration in many parts of the world struggle to reach the remote areas. Because one, the legal frameworks under which the CRVS is a part is very restrictive. And second, there is always the issue of weak institutional coordination that we have been discussing in the past few days already, and also um, the challenges geographically, because of course of geographical realities of isolated areas, disadvantaged areas. Um, sorry. Um, so these are three of the major challenges, and the point of this study is really legal reform. uh, a pathway is a legal reform with a strong community driven advocacy. It's a proven pathway to achieving this legal identity. Mobile birth registration, MBR, as referenced in this presentation, that adopts rights-based approach, generate the best practices that may apply in similar settings. So this is the objective of the study. So whatever it is, I'm sure that there are settings that may differ from the Philippines and Papua New Guinea, but certainly some of the best practices may be contextualized and that may also apply to similar settings. How to deal with the lack of awareness and importance of birth registration and the nearest and the distance to the nearest local civil registry authority is are a few of the hurdles that further exacerbate the lack of interest to register. So, okay, next. So in this research, we have conducted a regional legal review of the mobile registration provisions in the CRVS laws in different countries through the resources that we have at in JHAI. And also we've conducted policy review of existing legal instruments, systematic reviews of legal databases, and also updates from government websites and regional CRVS repositories. We also conducted key stakeholder interviews as we acknowledge that many of the birth registration systems involve different stakeholders. And also we conducted focus group discussions, the responses from which we sort of categorized by thematic areas. We also examined and analyzed secondary data sourced from mobile registration records. So to move directly to the results, um, in the Philippines, the mobile birth registration initiative called BRAP, as we call it, Birth Registration Assistance Project, is aimed at bringing the government service to the targeted locations, which initially targeted 2 million of the 3.7 million unregistered Filipinos. As mentioned in the slides, there are 3.7 million Filipinos who are unregistered, many of whom are from marginalized communities, from the poorest sectors, which included indigenous people and Muslim Filipinos. So the BRAP is this initiative that targeted initially 2 million of the 3.7 million unregistered Filipinos. And because of this initiative, we have delivered 459,000. I hope this is clear. Yeah, 454,999 birth certificates to beneficiaries as of September of 2025. And verification is still ongoing. So proceeding in Papua New Guinea, on the other hand, only 13% of the children were registered and 7% had birth certificates. So the mobile birth registration paved the way for the deployment of 44 mobile birth registration kits, portable and field-ready units capable of processing over 1,000 birth registrations per month. And I can be corrected by my colleague here, Jackson, for the more updated information. But the legal reform, what would I just like to highlight in this segment, that the legal reform embodied in the Civil Identity Registration Act of 2024 in Papua New Guinea actually changed the landscape in that Section 8.1 of that law authorized the said Register General to nominate a data collecting agents who go around the community and have these people registered. So what I want to underscore at this point is the importance of legal frameworks to allow and also to provide resources for more technology-enabled service delivery. And of course, this will be enshrined through the budget system of each country. So in the discussion section of this paper, the PNG model was illustrated more clearly, and it showed or it suggested that the low coverage, hard to reach setting in PNG can be scaled up through mobile birth registration. First, when there is a law that backs it up. Two, when there's technology, and also when there's governance that align with it. So more specifically, modernized law enabled mobile and digital registration. And in Papua New Guinea, technology designed the instruments or the tools, I believe, because they are using portable solar powered tools to do this mobile registration. And governance by institutionalizing mobile outreach is key to this approach. And rights-based approach to expand access to education, health, and social protection. In Capsule, legal reform plus mobile technology transformed CRVS from a fixed paper-based system to a more inclusive instrument. Okay. In Okay. In contrast, in the Philippines, the BRAP, the Birth Registration Assistance Project, which is going on its fourth year now, which was launched in 2022, targeted indigenous peoples and Muslim communities and residents in mountainous regions, along with other remote areas largely separated by large bodies of water. Because in the Philippines, we have about 7,100 islands. So that is very, disconnected sometimes from the center. And the BRAP itself became a platform for advocacy because during the mobile birth registration activity itself, it is the fundamental rights of the beneficiaries are explained, and yeah, the fundamental rights of the beneficiaries are explained during that activity, and it's very important to highlight that in the Philippine model, the importance of the partnership between the national and the local civil registry authorities. Just a little bit of a background: the Philippines works on a decentralized system, so there are the decentralized units are tasked to do their own approaches in terms of birth registration, but with the national authority um, basically designate or saying what the minimum requirements or standards should be. So lesson learned is to update the legislation, and I think um, that can further support the mobile and decentralized registration approaches. So what are the recommendations or recommended next steps? um, in Papua New Guinea, for example, the CIR Act, the law which covered their CRVS system, is quite fairly newly installed. So there's a need to leverage on the CIR Act of 2024 to further institutionalize the mobile and digital registration and strengthen the decentralized data collection. Of course, align technology, legal reform, and governance, which I mentioned earlier, and invest in frontline capacity outreach. Of course, this can only be possible if annual budgetary allocations are determined and also released. Very important that the budget allocated are released. So in the Philippines, in contrast, the Philippine model, we'd like to highlight that for the centralized systems, we adopted a framework of a community-based monitoring system, which empowers the community itself to govern the collection and also processing and validation of this aggregated data used for planning, program implementation, and impact monitoring. That way, that weak institutional coordination between the central and the subnational authorities are addressed. And con- um, acknowledging the fact that there is a multi-stakeholder environment in CRVS, legal support by way of local ordinances should complement the national provisions of the national law. So for decentralized environments, of course, the national law cannot stand alone, but it should be complemented also by the local ordinances that should support it. So I think I should stop here. My time is up, but just to um, end, these are the faces of children and women who are helping us advocate in both houses of Congress the passage of the new bill to replace the 100-year-old CRVS law in the Philippines. They consented to be the CRVS champions for the CRVS law in the Philippines. So with that, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation, Mike, and for sharing the important work that you and your team are doing to expand access to civil registration services for populations in hard to reach areas. And I think your examples from Philippines and Papua New Guinea, they clearly demonstrate how mobile birth registration can help extend those CRVS services to persons in geographically remote populations. And I think that's one of the key challenges faced by countries in the Asia Pacific region. And I was just looking up the statistics. In Asia Pacific, there are tens of thousands of islands, and correct me if I'm wrong, 600 inhabited islands in PNG and 2,000 in Philippines inhabited. And that's just two countries in Asia. And in the Pacific alone, there are also 25,000 inhabited islands. So I think it really just demonstrates the importance of these outreach and mobile registration campaigns, and their importance for achieving universal registration. So we have time for maybe one question from the audience, please.
Thank you for your beautiful presentation. I just want to better understand something. I want to know if mobile registration respect the territorial jurisdiction of civil registration, even it is mobile, and if it needs to, if it is require a change of the law. I didn't get it very well. Thank you.
I'll answer the second question. The revision in the law is very essential because it ensures the resources to be allocated for the mobile registration, because definitely there are resources needed to implement the mobile registration, and having it enshrined in the law ensures that there's budgetary resources channeled to it, and that they are released so that they can be implemented accordingly. In terms of territorial integrity or something, as I mentioned earlier, in the Philippines, we work on very decentralized systems, and we respect the approaches of the different local government units, as we call it, the LGUs, in the way they would like to approach the mobile registration system. So that way, you get different approaches, different configurations on the way to do the mobile birth registration. But the baseline approach in terms of setting the standards, the forms to be used, especially linking the information from the subnational to the national, are all uh, uh, set by the National Civil Registration Authority. So the link needs to be still there.
Please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So, given the situation that Philippines is, working in the decentralized model, my question is, if the local government can, make their own laws being based and just not contradictory with the national laws, is there any that kind of provision in Philippines?
Okay. In the original law of civil registration in the Philippines, while there is an autonomy of the local government units to implement their own CRVS systems, they have to be under the technical supervision of the national authority. So they cannot go outside of what is the mold of the national authority. So that in effect somehow ensures that every local government is aligned to the national objective. The new law, however, wishes to strengthen that central authority, because there are some areas in the law wherein the national authority cannot really demand to the local government. Particularly, I'm sure in other countries there are also erring or corrupt local civil registrars, for example. And by law and by mandate, sometimes it's very difficult for the national authority to reprimand the subnational system. So these are continuous improvements that we hope will be embedded in the new law that we are trying to campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. We'll move on to our next and final presenter. Um, So our next speaker is Jackson Taveri, who will present on the first mile of identity, Papua New Guinea's registration challenge. And Jackson Taveri has been grateful to work with colleagues at the Papua New Guinea Civil and Identity Registry in strengthening civil identity registration and vital statistics, having served in various leadership capacities, including Deputy Registrar General, Director of Corporate Services, Planning Chief, and Southern Region Operations Manager. He has recently transitioned into an advisory role as the technical lead consultant for the National Identity Project. Throughout his career, he has focused on improving service delivery and informing policy through collaboration and practical reforms. Over to you, Jackson.
Thank you, Chloe. As my name says, I'm not here to stress you out, number one, nor am I here to remind you of the challenges that you face in your own countries for data collection in vital events, but I am just here to share with you some experiences that Papua New Guinea faces when they're trying to collect vital events data. And it's interesting because of what Doctor presented, and it's so coincidental that we were seated in the same room, that he happened to place some form of foundation on the discussions that are about to happen. So moving forward, I'd like to acknowledge certain groups of people who made this event possible. SCAP members, the CUT initiative, starting from Rachel all the way down to Nicola and Nicholas for all the training and everything during the program. ECA members, your experiences were quite interesting to us in the SCAP group, and I've learned a lot through sharing these journeys. And of course, last but not least, Papua New Guinea Civil and Identity Registry and the 107 registration officers who shared their experiences. Without this research wouldn't have been possible to be made known. Why does this matter? Why does this research matter, the first mile of registration? Why does it matter? Because over 80% of our citizens live in remote communities, and getting an ID is not simple as it looks. We navigate rugged mountains, vast oceans, and like Chloe said, 600 inhabited islands, no roads. Bridging over 800 plus different languages, the Guinness record for being the #1 country that holds more languages than any other country in the globe. Overcoming deep community mistrust built over the years of delayed and broken promises. Legal identity obviously unlocks certain data and accessibility to services in health, education, in your legal systems for voting and your democracy, if you're a democratic country. And so, as the largest Pacific Island nation, and as Dr. put his statistics on 7% and the other 3% on registration rates, we perform at that level in reports, and it's underdocumented, which Dr. rightfully put it. And what's the missing piece for all this, and why is it happening? So the voice of registration officers, is seldom heard. So it's quite challenging when you are not listening to the front line. So the research, before any other research that goes on this platform on CRVS, should focus on their first experience of trying to collect one vital event data. Then we can move forward with other research. This is the methods I used. It comes in two phases, and it's a mixed method approach, where qualitative research approaches in interviewing strategic management and teams implementing CRVS informs the quantitative survey platform so that it further validates what is said in an open discussion with what can be quantified with the samples. Now, the activities reveal 4 themes, and through those 4 themes, 3 categories are measured. So I will go to the next slide, which is going to be interesting for you. This is the hierarchy of barriers that is ranked by the officers that collect vital event data in our country. And I believe some things would look familiar to you if you are facing challenges, especially in low and middle income countries. So systemic and operational challenges is ranked as number one. And under them, there are different percentages of certain issues that are faced. Number two is geographic and infrastructural, and then socio-cultural and communal. So all these are interrelated. Systemic being the first one, further increases the pain that the other two go through. And so the priority for improvement requested by the staff in the front line is to return the national identity document very quickly to the citizens to regain the trust. This is a vicious cycle that's happening in collecting the vital event data, where systemic delays erodes trust to the citizens, reduces public participation, and it goes back to the beginning. And it never ends. And I don't know when the right time will be when the National Identity Project will be done. Compared to Malawi, which I saw their presentation, they have a land that's 3 times smaller than us, but a population that's almost 5 to 10 times bigger than ours. But they are almost at 85% completion in CRVS, whereas we are struggling to hit 85% registration, ranking at around 30% completion. This is my finding, and I am going to triangulate what you saw 2 slides ago over here. I am going to triangulate all these results with the analysis that I made. And so under the qualitative findings, I found out that these 4 things were reoccurring in whatever that was found. And it was challenging to disaggregate emotions from systemic logic to really categorize this in the thematic stage. So operational logistics. Now, what does it mean? In the quantifying evidence, it means that 80% of our registry officers face road, weather, transport barriers. And this is a primary cost driver. Now, globally, we have about $4 to $20 just to collect one set of data in a remote community. For Papua New Guinea, it sits around $5 in the city, and it goes as high as $20, depending on the geographic location. Now, the next thing is strategy, where central plans ignore field reports. The top-down approach, where planning is done, it doesn't really deliver the operations at the ground level because the cost changes these plans. And so systemic issues become ranked number 1 before you face the other socio-cultural and geographical issues. This results in our officers becoming ambassadors in the country. So they participate as diplomat bureaucrats, meaning they navigate mindsets through resilience just to deliver this project. And 90% of this staff of civil identity registry, they face frustration about delayed national identity cards. And so you could imagine if you went back to cleanse your data and you never returned the card, you would face a mental challenge with the remote people of Papua New Guinea. And I'm hoping that it doesn't end up in an aggression. So the last thing to survive this adaptation and sustenance that's created by these officers and the office with whatever limitation to innovate and survive with informal solutions always existing but aren't captured in recorded events. Let's go to the next part, which is the recommendations, which is kind of simple, but hopefully it progresses policy intervention. First of all, processing priority. to accelerate the turnaround time of the national identity card, to invest in printing and distribution more than collecting the vital event itself, to regain the trust of the citizens of the country, and to make the demand available. Like Doctor said, there was no demand. Make the demand available. Number two, institutional reform. And also when Doctor talked about the legislation, this contributes to institutional reform. And the regulations are currently underway. And that will help to progress the discussions on staffing and other resources required to push against the systemic issues, to address the secondary issues, such as socio-cultural and geographic. And number three, strategic investment. And I know Doctor mentioned something about technology. Human capital is also important. To make it context appropriate to technology, training is required. So technology alone is not enough. Last but not least, how can this research contribute to everyone in this room? This is the implication of the research that displayed Papua New Guinea. Number one, before I continue, places like Sweden, it's not going to happen there. It's places, low middle income countries that are low in technology, that this discussion will benefit. Listening is the key to frontline officers because they know what works and what doesn't. Fixing the internal bottlenecks of the organization reduces cascading failures in the field. And last but not least, as I was saying, investing in people, not just technology, together is key to improving data collection of vital events in remote rural locations in Papua New Guinea and the globe. PNG's experience offers lessons for any country that's facing geographic, cultural, or systemic challenges. We are here to present our problems, and not just problems, to show you what innovations we've come across to improve registration of vital events. Last but not least, I'm going to go informal a bit. I want to show you pictures because seeing is believing. And most of the times we see words and numbers as demographers, researchers, doctors, but we don't really see pictures. So I just wanted to lighten the room with some pictures. So as you can see up here, that's a registration kit. And it weighs about 23 kilos. They are not walking on flat land. They are trying to climb a mountain. That's the first mile of identity. As you can see on the right side, thanks to former management, the Registrar General, and now the current is pushing this, and which the doctor said about 44 registration kits that existed during that time. Thank you to UNICEF. So I must thank some groups. This registration kit weighs about 16 kilos and it's solar generated. Power helps people to go to remote areas with no power. And we face issues with accessibility to networks as well. And so we are hoping that one day Starlink will be available in the country, and the hype about bringing that technology in is dissolved. Now, the innovation that happened from the left to the right improved our registration rates, speeding up our registration time, and collecting data sets that increased our registration from 10% coverage to almost 30%. Now, if you look down at the bottom, that's registration. We go to communities and we register, and we try our best to deliver whatever that we've already printed. On the right, thanks to UNICEF, we are connecting with hospitals, and that's a registration office that we've transported to one of the provinces in the country to set up civil registration office to connect hospitals back to civil registry systems. And technologically speaking, we are not connected, but physically and mentally we are with you. Health Department. Now, last but not least, my conclusion, and it always ends in children because registration starts with them. This group of children, when we traveled in the Highlands region, I was driving past and I noticed that they were having fun and I envied them. I was wondering if I could be in their capacity to not see all this stress that's happening in registration in the country. They are innocent. They do not understand whether they need a birth certificate or not. And it's a drive that's almost 2 hours out of the urban center in the district that's next to a provincial center. 2,300 meters in altitude, 90 kilometers from the main town. It's quite a distance and the road is not even sealed. The network, mobile network, is not even there. But believe it or not, they are enjoying life and life goes on. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jackson, for sharing those insights from Papua New Guinea. I know there's a lot happening at the moment in PNG in the CRVS strengthening space, especially with the passing of the new CRVS bill. So we look forward to seeing how this progresses as well. It was also very insightful to hear the perspectives of the registration officers working on the front line and how the operational challenges, geography, and delays in card issuance can really influence that community trust and participation in registration systems. So we have a bit of time now. Let's ask Jackson a question, and then we'll move into the speaker panel Q&A session. So if we have any questions for Jackson, please do raise your hand. We also, by the way, had a comment online from one of your colleagues, Jackson, who said, it was from Patricia Kiramat. She said, as a Papua New Guinean watching, I couldn't agree more with Mr. Taviri's presentation. These challenges are a reality and an eye-opener of the real struggles behind PNG obtaining 100%, let alone 80% of completion of registration. Very informative. Do we have any question for Jackson? If not, I have one, Jackson. You're not going to get away. I was interested in, there was one slide that you presented at the end on implications and what other settings could learn, and especially that first point about listening to the frontline officers because they know what works. I think in the earlier presentations in today's session, we've heard a lot about how trust between communities and frontline service providers can be influenced by issues such as stigma, discrimination, or limited engagement or sensitization efforts to really help strengthen that trust between registration officers and the communities they serve. So I was wondering, in Papua New Guinea, are there any initiatives underway, such as training or sensitization efforts, so that to enhance that trust in these frontline officers? Because that first point, it did surprise me.
Great. I enjoyed one of the presentations the other day by Milton. I think it's in Mozambique. He mentioned about collaboration, and that's something I learned, that we can't do it alone. And yes, we do have some form of awareness that's commencing, and we did do some brochures to start off and try to create communication platforms, but we are yet to fully disseminate, and we are hoping for collaboration and provincial collaborations and partners collaborations like UNICEF have proven to help to bring the demand and awareness to the communities in the country. And we are hoping that other partners get engaged because our theme for the next 3 years is to connect silos and unite Papua New Guinea through identity and one PNG. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackson. Okay, so now we will move on to a short panel discussion with our speakers where we invite you or the audience in the room or online to ask any of your questions to any of the speakers. And please remember that we also have online Madeline, Sebastian, and Najib, who are the presenters, the two first presentations at the beginning of this session. So please, the floor is open to your questions to any of our speakers. Or if you have a question that you can propose to all of our speakers, that's also totally fine.
I had a question, Jackson. It's a bit of a personal question. I just wanted to know, I guess, what your personal experience was being registered in PNG and if there were lessons that could be, transferred from why there was an importance for you or your family to register you, and then you were able to access all of the benefits of being registered and what lessons, if any, could be transferred. Oh,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, the same PNG also.
Oh.
Can we ask question first and then you can respond later? Yeah, similar context to my countries. We have 65% of the populations live in rural area, and this is making difficult to do birth registrations and also death registration also. And this is what we are facing at the moment, similar to PNG context. And I really want to integrate primary healthcare into the birth registration or death registration that we are trying to do at the moment. So we are trying to encourage or strengthening local authority to support. Yeah, like you mentioned, what is the experience from PNG? Because this kind of work cannot be achieved without local authority accountability and ownership and leadership. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll answer the personal question before I make my way out. On a personal note, I think for me to register, it was a challenge. It took me 4 years to get my national identity card. Even when I was working there, it took me 2 years to get my card. I had to go back to the hospital just to get my birth record to validate who I was, just to register. But that's on a personal note. But I believe it's been a bit simpler now for many Papua New Guineans because their registering processes have been improved slightly, despite the fact that you don't get your card quickly. And the important thing is you're on a database and you can be traced later on in life. And I was so grateful with the health systems. Without them, I would be stateless. Yeah. So I think connecting silos is quite important and data sets that we have in the country. And if health systems can connect to our civil registry systems via a notifier function, like something that's done in Malawi and Cambodia, where their health informs their national identity, then it would be nice. Although in our country, civil registry database is all in one with national identity, we are yet to connect the health system fully to register birth and death records. And even though it's in silos, I hope that one day these silos will be connected, and probably after regulations are done and technology should be digitized to connect them. The next question that was asked, its relation is not necessarily to some form of, academic rigor or something that's too complex. But I believe if you have the ability to convince and the perspective that you can use to change minds, then I believe you will get a lot of support from wherever you are trying to get your support from, even from your government. And I believe the political systems don't necessarily or really run in parallel with the bureaucratic systems, because everyone has a mind of their own. And when they come in with their belief system, it's very difficult to get support. And that's quite challenging. And I believe for your case, if you can change minds, and what we use in Papua New Guinea is called resilience. Even though we face a lot of mindsets, we are still resilient, knowing why we do what we do. We register because the next generation depends on it. And hopefully we can complete the country and sit together 10 years from now and speak the same language, so that we'll understand how to bring resources to register our people. Thank you. I hope that helped.
Thank you, Jackson. Any other questions from the audience?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Jackson. I don't know if this is a question or a comment. I am Tiako from Lesotho, and I work as a civil registration officer in the National Identity and Civil Registry there. Yes. Every time I see the word listen to the frontline officers, there comes political will in my mind. And I want to believe that there's a problem there. So if I am correct, what do you think in your country you should do to influence the principal to overcome this? Because as collaboration of stakeholders can help, and also creation of demand will also come from the government. So we have to start there. The political will has to be there so that all the other ones connect. And so what are you doing to overcome that? Thank you.
You rightfully put it, the unsaid gap and discussions, and that normally would put you in trouble if you talk about it publicly. But having said that, I believe in leaders who have a vision. And if political leaders have that vision for vital events registration, then it would be very easy. If their vision is focused on something like just trying to make revenue or other things that don't deal with human beings, I believe that can become a challenge. Now, wealth can be measured. Wealth is people and land. It's not money or economy. And I hope that, like I said previously, battling a perception is quite challenging, especially political perception. Now, in our country, because of how the project started, it was quite difficult because the country was new, and so they made mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, but doesn't mean we get judged for the entire 40 years that's yet to come, because there's time for improvement, collection, and correction. And so to battle that, the only way to do it with tough mindsets is to be a politician and get in there and fix it. So that's all I can say. As a bureaucrat, you cannot do much. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. Please.
Hi, once again. My question is for Claire. So you earlier mentioned in the presentation that in Ecuador, the citizen, they can legally change their name and identity in the registration certificate. So I would like to inquire if there is any time frame, like when at what time they could, for what time frame they could change the name and gender, and for how many times. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I don't know the precise details, but I can say that even though it is possible to change your gender and name, and some of the examples that I recall are, it did take some time, but doing that interoperably, like across the whole system, takes even longer. So I would say some of the examples that I've read have talked about years still, and interoperably, then it's even more. It's multiple years. So that's my familiarity. I can also say that I'm not the lead on this study, and so I can refer your question to the lead, and you can probably get more details. Yeah.
Thanks, Claire. Any other questions? Two.
Questions, one for Nepal studies and the other for Claire. In your study, did you see any gender difference among the people living with HIV in accessing the service? Yeah, and then can I continue with? Oh, okay, please. So for Claire, in Thailand, we've been discussing, it's a hot debate over whether we should give the recognitions of gender identities or, gender preference on the document. And then you touch upon the health setting, the health sectors, right? So, I mean, there was some sort of medical professional that kind of against, for example, we want to, in Thailand, we can use the ID when you check into the hospital. But, so we're wondering, like whether we should keep biological sex or on the document, it should be, like their genders, information. So, or we should keep both informations. I mean, I wonder, what are your thoughts on this, or what are the example from other country? What have been done in other country? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So maybe we'll get to Sajana first.
So thank you for the question. Can you repeat like gender-based discrimination in accessing civil registrations? Yeah, even during our study, we found few examples. Also, we in our Nepal we can have get citizenship from our mother's name too, but there were few people living with HIV. Also, we call women living with HIV. Like they have some sort of documentation, but their husband dies due to the HIV, but she cannot register, or she cannot provide birth registration from her name to the children. So there are, I think, many cases. Also, even though our legal frameworks, there are no such kind of discrimination, but in practice or in the administration process, there is a discrimination. So thank you.
Thank you for the question. I do think it's a complex issue, but I would say ideally we would get both gender identity and sex assigned at birth. I'm not sure that they all need to be on an identity card. I think that we want that information for our records and to be able to understand things like cause of death and how it's associated with different factors. I think for identity cards where you're just like trying to check in at the hospital and things like that, that we should let the person decide what information should be on there. And I think we need to, at a minimum, have names that are appropriate and that are self-identified. But we may not need to have gender identity on there. I think it needs to be in the record somewhere, but I don't know that it needs to be like right there on the card. For some people, that could introduce bias. Now, that might be less true in some contexts than others. It depends on the country, and that's why I think it's good to go back to what does the person want. But obviously, in their medical record, they will need to have some information about biological sex as it was assigned originally. Yeah. I'm definitely curious what other people think about that question, though, too. I think it's a very important question.
opening the room up for any final comments, remarks, questions. Okay, I have one. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Mine is just a comment to Dr.
Claire.
No. Yes.
Sajana.
Yes. Back in Kenya, the health workers, they're the biggest barrier to registration to those on care. Like if one defaults for a certain period and seeks civil registration services and presents the ID, they cannot be registered. Or if someone dies, so you find that the relatives, they change the names. They change the names for the person to be registered. Now, when this person is coming for a death certificate or a birth certificate, you find that the names are different. Now it's upon you, the registrar, just to based on your discretion, to assist so that the names at least they match. I don't know your experience in your country. Then also to Dr.
To Claire.
Dr. Claire, yes. Back in Kenya, there was this case back in 2014. There was this. He was Andrew. Then they wanted to change the name to Audrey. The case dragged on in court for long, but finally there was a ruling, and she was able to. The gender was changed. And also currently, even the civil registration laws that are being reviewed in Kenya, so currently we have male, female, and the intersex. So maybe there should be more advocacy or awareness so that at least they can be assisted. Thank you.
I'm so sorry I couldn't get your question. I mean, comment. So could you please repeat?
It was just a comment.
Oh, thank you.
No, but I think I can. May I? Okay, so in case of Nepal, in case of Nepal, if the mother or father of a child, if they are not they're unknown about the whereabouts, and if they are missing, so it would be the responsible the local ward chairperson or the local representatives. They would be responsible to act as a father or to act as a guardian of such children, and they are responsible to work as informants for the birth registration process. That's the provision in Nepal. Thank you.
Claire, did you want to make a final?
I just wanted to say that that's a great example, and I'm so glad to hear that in Kenya, and that it's being able to change your name and making it consistent with your gender identity is so important for access to all sorts of human rights, because it's so difficult to go walk into a doctor's office or healthcare facility if you know that you're going to be facing harassment or discrimination. And so being able to go there and have people not have to make assumptions about how you look, and that your gender on your card, especially your name and your picture, are consistent with your presentation, just makes it possible for people to feel comfortable getting access to things that really are human rights. So I do think it's a very important and encouraging example.
Thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for today, folks. If you want to learn more from our presenters, please feel free to chat with them after the session and also exchange your contact information. I'd like to say thank you so much to all of our speakers, both in the room and online, for sharing such thoughtful and also inspiring research with us today. The studies we heard really demonstrate the scale of the challenges that do still remain, but also the many innovative and committed efforts underway to ensure that CRVS ID systems become more inclusive. And I would also like to acknowledge and thank the individuals and communities who have shared their lived experiences as part of these research studies, and their voices are really critical in helping us better understand the realities people face when trying to access civil registration and legal identity services, and they provide an essential evidence base to inform more inclusive policies and systems moving forward. Ultimately, and lastly, ensuring CRVS systems, it is a shared responsibility for governments, development partners, researchers, and communities as well, because even systems which have 99.9% completeness, so 99.9% of births which are registered, this system is still leaving people out. And for those individuals, the consequences can mean remaining invisible to the state and then excluded from rights, services, and statistics. So the challenge before us is to continue working together to ensure that no one remains invisible in our registration systems. So thank you very much again to our presenters for making the time to be here to share their work with us. Please give our presenters another round of applause. And thank you to all of you for joining this session. And I would also like to thank my co-moderators, Tum and Nicholas, for their support. So now we'll move on to the lunch break, which will go on until 1:15 p.m., which is when the next sessions will start this afternoon. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the research forum.